Lesson 6.3, how does natural selection impact allele frequencies? This is sometimes referred to as population genetics. So we're going to start off talking about the idea of a gene pool. It's the combined genetic information of all members of that particular population. So if we look, we have a gene pool of mice. It appears that the black colored mouse is more prevalent. However, upon looking at the gene pool, which is over here, the allele for brown fur is actually more frequent. So we can calculate that by counting up how many alleles there are, which there's 50 total alleles. 30 of those, and you can see the check marks, are the brown fur allele. So you take 30 divided by 50 and you get 60%. Whereas the black fur allele color, there are 20, and that's 40%. Really, a lot of this can be attributed to the fact that there are more heterozygous black mice. So what we do know is if the allele frequency is changing, then evolution's occurring. So some mechanism, what ultimately determines the variation that exists among these populations? We have a deck of cards, and really shuffling the deck can only shuffle or produce many different hands, but it doesn't change the actual number of kings or queens in the deck. So what are four forces that could alter the allele frequency or change the allele frequency? They are mutation, gene flow, which is also known as migration, genetic drift, and natural selection. These first three are due to chance. So I have these explained a little bit further in more detail. You should take the time to read these. But a mutation is there are two green beetles, and there is a mutation that a brown coloration is now a new allele to that population. Migration is if this brown beetle would migrate or join a population of green beetles, and then within reproduction of future generations, there will be more brown beetles than when there were before. Notice this gene pool will change, but this gene pool does not. Genetic drift is something that happens just by chance. So by chance, these green beetles were destroyed. So now this gene pool has changed. The remaining species that are remaining are going to be the ones that reproduce to produce future offspring. And then last but not least, what Darwin explained is natural selection, that this bird chose the green beetle, whatever reason it may have been, whether it's just that the brown were more likely to survive and produce offspring, this gene pool was altered. So a review of things we learned in genetics. There are single gene traits and there are polygenic traits, ones that are controlled by several genes. So if nature selects against a single gene trait, it will drastically reduce that appearance of that phenotype. Whereas in polygenic, it's a little bit more complicated. The nature may select in a different area, so you're still going to see some remaining things happen, whether the mean or the average is going to increase or decrease, or you may notice a shift. So let's take a look at natural selection on single gene traits. What you should do is describe what you think is happening in this population and form your conclusion down here at the bottom. So the initial population is 80% brown salamanders, 10% red, and 10% black. What you want to do is observe generation 10, 20, and 30 and describe how it's changing and propose why it might be changing. Practice test question. Take a look at this diagram of number of rabbits, original fur colors 10 years later. We're going to look at polygenic traits. Three things can happen. Directional selection is a result when nature selects against one extreme. So in this case, the small beak size. Students in class hypothesized that maybe birds with smaller beaks could not obtain food because seed size got larger. Whatever the case, what you see is a shift in beak size. So there's no longer smaller beak size, but over time, beak sizes, we notice larger beak sizes. Stabilizing selection is a result when nature selects against both extremes, so this end and this end. In this case, this is birth mass. So over the decades, we've noticed that birth mass has actually narrowed, the range has narrowed, and that could be because of better prenatal care. Disruptive selection is when nature selects against the mean. So in this case, anything that had the average beak size, nature selected. And you can read carefully what may have happened in this population that caused this. Again, going back to the mechanisms or the how, gene flow, migration can impact the gene pool as well. So here you have population 1, large population containing birds. We have brown and we have white. And this white bird that has the both recessive alleles is now going to migrate into population 2. So this is going to introduce a new allele that has not been part of this population before. An example of altering the gene pool by gene flow is the Vietnam War, when American soldiers had offspring with Vietnamese women. This altered the gene pool in Vietnam. Now, it's important to point out that when this bird left, it did not alter this gene pool, only the pool that it migrated into. Same thing is for the American gene pool, unless then the gene pool is not altered. Finally, we're going to take a look at genetic drift and the founder effect and the bottleneck effect. Genetic drift is an unpredictable fluctuation in allele frequencies. The founder effect is talking about a sample of the original population. So it's kind of like if a new habitat is colonized, or just you take a small portion of original population, it is the founder of a new population. So this population A does not exactly or identically represent the original population. Some similarities, but not identical. And the descendants, therefore, will represent the founding population, not the original population. Same goes for population B, so you can just see it in another example. The bottleneck effect is also an example of genetic drift. Something may cause the population to drastically reduce. So in both of these, the population is reduced. So it's either a founding population moves to a new habitat, or something like this, overhunting or natural disasters causes a reduction in population. So now surviving individuals don't represent the parent population, and therefore the next generation is not going to represent the original parent population. The last lesson is on speciation.